It was the kind of silence that makes your ribs ache, the kind that comes not from peace, but from the weight of everything left unsaid. Elijah Grant sat there, unmoving, unblinking, not because he was calm, but because he'd already lived this moment 1,000 times in his mind. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and ink, but beneath that was something sharper, something electric, like the air before a storm. Camille Harper adjusted the sleeve of her blazer with meticulous grace, the same way she used to fix her hair in their bathroom mirror at 6 a.m. Before heading out to meetings, she never explained. She didn't look at Elijah. She didn't have to. She believed the game was over, that she'd won, that what came next was formality, the legal bow on a betrayal she thought was perfectly executed. The judge cleared his throat and the sound cut through the tension like a scalpel through silk. We'll now play Exhibit 31E as submitted by the plaintiff. Elijah exhaled slowly, and for a fleeting moment the muscles in Camille's jaw tensed. Then the recording began, not with her voice, but with a laugh, soft, calculated, and chilling. Then her words followed, lazy with arrogance. He still has no clue. Once the money's moved, we'll file. He'll be too stunned to react. Troy says we can dissolve the LLC in a week. By the time he figures it out, we'll be sipping sangria in Tulum. There was laughter again. Troy's this time, and a clinking of glasses like a toast to the stupidity of a man who had trusted too much, loved too blindly, and asked too few questions. The gallery didn't gasp. It held its collective breath, like an audience afraid to blink in the face of truth. Camille didn't move, but her hands, once elegantly poised, now gripped the armrest of her chair with the restraint of someone suppressing panic behind perfect posture. Elijah stood, not abruptly, not for drama, but like a man reclaiming gravity after floating in free fall too long. "That voice," he said, eyes fixed on the judge, "belongs to my ex-wife. The plan? Conceived with my financial advisor, my best friend, the man I asked to be godfather to our son." Camille shifted, just slightly, but enough. Enough to make her silence louder than any denial. "There's more," Elijah continued, voice steady but thick, like a dam on the edge of rupture. "Bank transfers, shell corporations, documents signed under duress. The condo she claimed in the divorce was funded with money siphoned through accounts I never knew existed. Until now." His words weren't weapons. They were mirrors, and in each one Camille saw her reflection fracturing. The judge asked if the defense wished to respond, but Camille didn't speak. Couldn't. Her lawyer reached to whisper, but she recoiled. And that's when the final blow came. Not from Elijah, but from the courtroom door creaking open as a figure stepped inside. A woman in a charcoal suit, hair tied in a sleek bun, handed the judge a sealed envelope. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "this is from the State Bar's Financial Crimes Unit. New evidence submitted this morning." Camille turned, and for the first time that day, her eyes met Elijah's. And what she saw wasn't rage, wasn't pain. It was mercy withheld. It was the terrifying stillness of someone who no longer needs to raise his voice to be heard. The judge read silently, then looked up, expression unreadable. "In light of this," he said, "this court is considering fraud, perjury, and intentional asset concealment. Mrs. Harper, your rights to shared property are hereby frozen pending further review." Camille opened her mouth, but no words came. Her face paled, not the dramatic gasp of a guilty party, but the quiet devastation of someone watching a glass world shatter in slow motion. And Elijah? He simply nodded, as if to confirm what karma had already decided. Then he sat down, one hand gently adjusting the cuffs of his suit, clean, unapologetic, and finally, free. But none of this started in courtroom 12C. No. It started in a quiet house in Palo Alto, with morning coffee and gentle hands, with small lies disguised as kindness and silence passed off as peace. This is Karma Strikes, where betrayal isn't punished with fire, but with cold, undeniable truth. And this was only the beginning. There was a time when the sound of a kettle boiling meant comfort, meant routine, meant the world outside could rage. But this kitchen, this room, this moment was sacred. Elijah would rise before the sun, not out of duty, but instinct, as though some part of him believed that by starting the day before her, by setting the world right before she opened her eyes, he could shield her from everything that might go wrong. He would grind the beans perfectly, not a grain too fine, not a second too long, and he would pour the water in slow circles, the way Camille liked it, because to him, love lived in the details, the subtle, the invisible, the quiet acts no one clapped for. And every morning when he'd set the mug on her side of the counter, she would smile. Just once. That was all he needed. But something changed. Not with a crash, not with a scream, with a pause, a missing smile. A longer silence. One day she didn't drink the coffee, said she'd already had some. Then she stopped showing up in the mornings altogether, claiming late-night work left her too tired, that sleeping in helped her feel centered. Elijah didn't argue. He adjusted, started drinking alone, telling himself maybe this was just what marriage looked like after 5 years, after so many birthdays and tax seasons and not-tonight babe moments, that maybe this was normal. But what he didn't realize, what most people never realize until too late, is that betrayal doesn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It seeps. It creeps. It builds a nest inside your normal, feeding on the silence you mistake for peace. He watched her shift. Not suddenly, but subtly. Her laughter got louder, but not with him. Her wardrobe changed. More heels, more red. She started wearing lipstick to go to the grocery store. Elijah noticed, of course he did, but instead of asking, he made excuses. She's rediscovering herself. She's evolving. Isn't that what partners do? Grow, support, don't cling. He'd read it in some book, probably underlined it, probably believed it. But support is different from surrender, and Elijah had been surrendering inch by inch, giving up space until the apartment he paid for no longer felt like his own. She started locking her phone, laughing at texts that never had names attached. Elijah asked once, gently, what was funny. She said it was a meme, didn't show him. He didn't press. He'd been raised better. But kindness, when given to the wrong person, isn't virtue. It's ammunition. He remembered the first real fracture. A dinner he cooked, risotto, slow, saffron, her favorite. And she walked in wearing a scent he didn't recognize. She kissed his cheek like a formality, then sat across from him and said they needed to talk. His chest tightened. He thought, pregnancy? Illness? Instead, she said she felt like they were drifting, that maybe space would help, that maybe it wasn't him, just life. And when he asked if there was someone else, she didn't answer. Just looked down at her plate, like the rice might hold the truth. Elijah didn't yell. He nodded, took a bite, said, "We'll figure it out." Because he didn't want to lose her. Because losing her felt like losing the version of himself that made sense. But that night, he opened her laptop. Not to spy, not really. Just to find a playlist, a file, something mundane. But the tab was still open. A transfer receipt, $2,500, T. Westbrook, LLC. Elijah's blood ran cold. Troy. It couldn't be. Hadn't seen him in years. The guy was loud, brash, the kind of man who talked over women while pretending he was empowering them. Elijah had cut ties after college, after one too many jokes about trading up, but apparently Camille hadn't. And now, here was his name, embedded in her finances, hidden in a file named Tax Draft V3. His hands trembled, not with rage, with recognition, because somewhere, deep down, he'd known, not the details, but the shape of it. The way you know a storm is coming before the sky turns. That night, he didn't confront her. He lay beside her in bed, pretending to sleep, listening to her breath, trying to remember which part of her voice was real and which part had learned how to lie. And the next day, he did what engineers do best. He built a system. He called Rachel, an old colleague turned attorney, told her it was for a friend. She didn't buy it, asked for names. When he hesitated, she said, "If she's innocent, there's nothing to find. But if she's not, then you're already bleeding. You just haven't looked down yet." That stuck. That line. It didn't hurt like a warning. It burned like a prophecy. And so Elijah started logging in early, checking IP addresses, geolocation pings, watching, waiting, gathering. And with every file, every trail, every digital breadcrumb, the shape of the betrayal grew clearer. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a plan, a dismantling, a liquidation masked as love. And somewhere along the way, the part of him that wanted to save the marriage died quietly, like a candle burning out in a room no one entered anymore. The final twist came on a Tuesday. Camille left her tablet unlocked. He wasn't even trying anymore. Didn't need to. And there it was. A message thread labeled Thursday dinner. Not just flirtation, not even deception, but coordination. Don't forget to have him sign the refi papers before wine. Followed by, he won't know. He trusts too easily. Elijah stared at the screen, not with shock, but with clarity, as if the world had tilted into focus. And in that moment, something in him clicked. Not broken, not shattered, clicked. Like a switch flipped. Like the end of grieving. Like the beginning of war. It started with a heartbeat. Steady, slow, but heavier than usual. Like a metronome counting down not music, but collapse. Elijah sat at his desk with the tablet still open. Camille's messages staring back at him, glowing against the darkness of their shared home. And the room, which once knew only laughter and the clicking of spoons against ceramic, now pulsed with the quiet violence of truth unspooling. The house around him was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the wood, cracking as it cooled. But inside his chest, something more ancient stirred. A force without words, not rage, not grief, but the realization that he'd been living in a memory someone else had already deleted. The messages weren't dramatic. They were surgical. He'll sign. He always does. Her confidence was the knife. Her predictability, the twist. Camille had studied Elijah not to understand him, but to map his weaknesses, to choreograph the performance of love with the precision of a con artist, rehearsing a role she no longer respected. This wasn't adultery. It was architecture, a design for departure. And every shared Netflix login, every forgotten anniversary made up for with breakfast in bed, every post-it note with tiny hearts had been retroactively weaponized, part of a script he hadn't even auditioned for. Elijah didn't cry. His silence was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of systems shutting down, of a soul preparing for reassembly. He closed the tablet not like a man defeated, but like a man who knew the real game had just begun. He didn't leave. He didn't confront. He stayed. And in staying, he became someone Camille would never see coming. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the marble counters like nothing had happened, and Camille danced through the kitchen in a robe she'd once worn on their honeymoon. humming a song he no longer recognized, pouring oat milk into her smoothie, and complaining about a client she invented 5 seconds earlier. She kissed him. He kissed back. And in that exchange, one brief, cold, choreographed kiss, Elijah made a vow. He would not burn. He would freeze. And when ice breaks, it cuts sharper than fire ever could. At work, he called Rachel. No more hypotheticals. No more theories. He laid out the timeline, the transfers, the LLC, the moments of sudden wardrobe changes, of late-night calls that ended the second he entered the room, of perfume that lingered like an alibi. Rachel was silent, then said only one thing. "You need evidence. Cold, clinical, indisputable. Start recording. Start collecting. Elijah, this isn't heartbreak. It's organized fraud." The words echoed in his skull like a judge's gavel, and for the first time in weeks, Elijah felt steady. He had always trusted patterns, and Camille's betrayal had a pattern. Now, it would have a file. He bought a burner phone, installed cloud backup software that triggered on keywords, placed a pen on the kitchen counter that recorded every sound within 10 feet. Every night, he cataloged his data like a surgeon logs organs before a transplant, and every morning, he smiled as if nothing was wrong. Camille never noticed. Why would she? She'd already filed him under non-threat. Her greatest mistake, the mistake all predators make. They confuse silence with surrender. One evening, as she took a call outside that lasted too long for a food delivery, Elijah accessed her laptop. Not out of spite, out of necessity. What he found wasn't scandal. It was confirmation. A PDF invoice from Troy's firm to a branding client that didn't exist. The account numbers matched their joint savings withdrawals. The document metadata showed it had been authored on Camille's IP. Elijah screenshotted it, backed it up, emailed it to a drive only he knew existed. That night, he made her tea. Chamomile. She said he was sweet. He almost laughed. But it wasn't until the voicemail that Elijah truly understood the depth. Camille butt-dialed him from a wine bar. He picked up but said nothing. She didn't notice. And he listened. To her voice dripping with condescension. To Troy's laugh. "He still thinks you love him?" "Please," she replied. "He's furniture. Useful. Quiet. Easy to ignore." That sentence didn't break Elijah. It completed him. He stopped being the man who begged explanations and became the man who set traps. Rachel brought in a PI. Within 4 days, they had photos. Camille touring apartments. Troy meeting a notary with forged documents. They planned to drain Elijah's retirement under a power of attorney Camille had forged while he slept. She hadn't just wanted to leave him. She wanted to erase him, to consume the life he built and wear it like her own. And Elijah? He let her. For 1 more week. He let her believe he was still asleep. He let her mock him behind closed doors, let her fake orgasms and fake gratitude, let her sip wine paid for with his future. And every moment he recorded. Not just sounds, but her rhythms, her speech patterns, the way she paused when lying, the way her eyes darted when caught. He studied her like a mirror designed to lie. Because what Camille never understood was this. Elijah was never the fool. He was the architect. And now, the blueprint was finished. The next phase would begin. Not with a confrontation, with an execution. Because karma doesn't strike when you're ready. It strikes when the performance ends. And Camille was about to take her final bow without even knowing the curtain had dropped. And behind the velvet curtain she thought she controlled, Elijah stood in silence, not as an audience, but as the director. The stage was set. The lights were waiting. And Act 2 was about to begin. And when the stage was set, when the velvet curtain hung still in the air, Elijah moved. not with vengeance, but with precision. In the quiet hours before dawn, while Camille slept in the bed they once called sacred, he scrolled through her emails, photographed her financial records, cross-referenced every receipt that didn't make sense, no longer chasing ghosts, but laying bricks for the architecture of exposure. His fingers danced like surgeons across devices, not to revive, but to dissect the corpse of a marriage already embalmed in deceit. Each screenshot became a heartbeat in the pulse of justice he now orchestrated, and with Rachel's guidance, the symphony of truth began to take form. Forged signatures embedded in innocuous insurance forms, transfers masked as reimbursements, emails laced with the calm cruelty of someone rehearsing manipulation, and Elijah, never a man of confrontation, now found himself rehearsing control. He mapped Camille's rhythms, not for intimacy, but to preempt her next deception, and he began placing audio triggers in common spaces, backing up everything to a drive hidden within folders named after vacations they never took, smiles they never shared. As the evidence mounted, his expression remained neutral, his tone stayed warm, and Camille, wrapped in her illusion, mistook his detachment for defeat. But the war Elijah was fighting wasn't just about data. It was spiritual. It was about reclaiming the version of himself that had been diluted over years of subtle disrespect and well-packaged deception. He started revisiting old files, photos of their early days, voice notes he'd saved from when Camille used to leave him sweet messages. But now, each smile was sinister, each whisper laced with hindsight. The contrast carved something new inside him, not bitterness, but clarity. He wasn't hunting her. He was recovering himself. He created a false thread of infidelity, planting conversations between himself and an imaginary lover, crafted with timestamps, flirtation coded in restraint, the kind Camille would mistake for authenticity. She noticed, of course. Jealousy uncoils faster than guilt, and Elijah watched her unravel in slow motion, her hands gripping her phone longer, her eyes narrowing at his screen, her laughter thinning. One night, when she thought he was asleep, she scrolled through his call logs, finding nothing but the echo of her own projections. She accused him of betrayal, and the irony struck Elijah like a silent storm, the thief shouting about missing coins. Camille didn't see it yet, but she was auditioning for a confession, and Elijah, always the observer, now became the narrator. Then, like all manipulators sensing they might be outmaneuvered, she began to test him. Small remarks cloaked as concern. "You seem distracted lately, Eli. Everything okay?" He responded with the perfect dosage of passive compliance. He gave her no rise, no spark, no thread to pull. And in the silence of his surrender, she grew confident again. That was the moment he knew he had to press deeper. He scripted a moment, a fake financial clause buried in a decoy contract, needing her signature to finalize a restructure. Camille signed, wearing a crimson dress, unaware the camera hidden in the bouquet captured her hand as it etched the last piece of her undoing. The footage wasn't dramatic. It was clinical, precise. A woman comfortable in control. And it was time-stamped, geotagged, backed up 6 ways across firewalled clouds and encrypted sticks. Elijah watched it once, then once more. Not for satisfaction, but for certainty. And then came the twist. Camille made a call to Troy, and she used the phrase, Plan B. Elijah, listening through the planted bug in the guest room, realized there was another layer. This wasn't just about her stealing from him. This was a setup. Plan B, as he later uncovered through a search of their shared storage unit, was a stash of pre-signed documents crafted to implicate Elijah in fraud. She wasn't just escaping. She was preemptively absolving herself by preparing to bury him. He stared at the documents for hours, fingers trembling not with fear, but with the disbelief of someone realizing they were never in a relationship. They were the mark in a con. But even in that moment of devastation, Elijah didn't flinch outwardly. He copied each document, scanned them into cloud storage, and placed the originals back with surgical precision, not to preserve her plan, but to dismantle it at the perfect time. And still, he came home that night with flowers, a habit, an echo. Camille smiled, kissed him on the cheek, and said, "You always know how to make me feel safe." And Elijah, with a calmness bordering on tragic elegance, replied, "That's all I've ever wanted." The next move wasn't reaction, it was design. Elijah began building a legal back channel with Rachel, who connected him to a forensics investigator, discreet, unaffiliated, brutal in the way truth often is. They started syncing metadata across Camille's devices, compiling a forensic trail so tight it left no space for denial. Texts, GPS trails, deleted drafts. Everything told the same story. Camille hadn't just wanted out, she wanted Elijah erased. The man, the name, the reputation, the money. She had rehearsed this betrayal like a stage monologue, but what she didn't know was that her script had been rewritten. Silently, precisely, frame by frame. And as her certainty thickened, Elijah's silence hardened. He didn't respond to her digs anymore, didn't flinch when she slipped and said, "When we're separated." He simply smiled, as if she'd revealed something he'd long accepted. Then came the dinner. Elijah chose the same restaurant where they'd first shared a bottle of Pinot and a future. She wore white, always did when she wanted to feel powerful. But that night, the fabric looked thinner, like truth might tear through it at any second. She ordered confidently, joked with the waiter, her voice buttered with the thrill of escape. Elijah, calm, let her talk. About her brand expansion, her plans for travel, a fresh chapter. He nodded, sipped his wine, until she excused herself to the restroom. That's when he placed the envelope on her plate, an elegant seal, her name embossed. Inside, every lie dressed in ink. Receipts, logs, contracts, and a line she didn't expect. "You rehearsed this role. I directed the stage." She returned, eyes lighting on the envelope like it was a dessert. She opened it with the same carelessness she'd once reserved for their wedding photos. But when she reached the USB and read the summary, her smile died a quiet death. Her fingers curled around the edges like they were cliffs, and her breath hitched. She looked up, but Elijah didn't look triumphant. He looked relieved, not like a man who'd won, but like someone who finally woke up. The silence between them grew teeth, and Camille, for the first time, blinked like someone unsure which lines were hers to speak. She reached for her glass, but her hand missed. A tremor, a truth. And Elijah whispered, just loud enough for her to hear but too soft for anyone else to grasp. The curtain hadn't just dropped, it caught fire. Then he stood, adjusted his jacket, and left. Not rushing, not striding, but walking like a man no longer tethered to the story someone else wrote for him. Behind him, Camille remained seated, still, wordless. The woman who thought she'd orchestrated the final act now trapped in a role with no audience, no exit, no applause. The room wasn't a courtroom, but the silence in it was heavier than any judge's gavel. Perched on the 17th floor of a building where contracts were written in stone and reputations were often dissolved over coffee, the private estate boardroom had walls made of glass, but truths that hit like concrete. Camille arrived 5 minutes late, not by accident, but as a performance, because women who control narratives always enter just after tension has taken root. She wore ivory from head to toe, her stilettos whispering dominance across the polished floor, her smile slow and curated like a weapon sheathed in silk. But across the table, Elijah was already seated, motionless, eyes scanning no document and yet seeing everything. He wore black, not for mourning, but for rebirth. His jawline didn't twitch. His hands didn't move. And Camille, for all her control, paused half a second too long before sliding into the leather chair across from him. Rachel, his attorney, stood like a metronome set to justice. "Miss Calloway," she began, voice void of pleasantries, "thank you for joining us. Today is not a trial, but it is an accounting." Camille chuckled, low and warm, designed to destabilize, but no one flinched. She crossed her legs. "I hope this isn't a lecture," she said with honeyed venom, "because I already know the ending." Elijah's eyes remained locked, not with anger, not even with focus, but with something colder. Calculation. Rachel didn't answer Camille's jab. She merely reached into a file marked with no label and withdrew a series of neatly tabbed folders. "These are the financial inconsistencies discovered during our review of the marital assets." Camille tilted her head, smiled again. "You mean the spreadsheet you obsessed over?" she asked Elijah, who didn't respond. Rachel continued. "What you called a spreadsheet is a map, and maps when layered become stories." With a single motion, Rachel laid out the first folder, flipping pages in practiced rhythm. Dates, transfers, vendor codes that didn't align, reimbursements filed through shell accounts Camille once told Elijah were routine. Camille didn't blink. "This is weak. I know how to read paper." Rachel didn't argue. She reached next for a printed screenshot. It was from Camille's inbox. Elijah's shared tablet had backed it up automatically 6 months ago. The email was short, one line, sent to a name labeled simply Orion. "Finalize. The trust restructure. He won't notice the sign-off. It's in the middle of the insurance page." Camille's smile didn't break, but her tongue slipped out slightly to wet her bottom lip, a tell Elijah had learned in year 2 of their marriage, but had never mentioned. Not until now. Still, he didn't speak. The silence from him was more powerful than any accusation. Camille turned slightly toward him. "You're really doing this?" she asked. Elijah blinked once. Rachel continued. "We're not here to shame you. We're here to return what was stolen." Camille leaned back, arms folded, fingers tapping lightly on her elbow as if rehearsing patience, but her knee bounced, just once, involuntarily. That was the first crack, but no one pointed to it. Not yet. Because Camille wasn't cornered. She just didn't realize she'd already stepped onto a stage whose lights had been angled for exposure. Camille still wore her composure like armor, but it had begun to creak at the edges, and when Rachel clicked a small silver device on the table and pressed play, it didn't explode. It bled. The voice that filled the room wasn't Elijah's, and that's what made it deadly. It was Troy, smooth, confident, unaware he was being recorded. "Get him to sign it drunk. He's soft. You can twist him if you keep the tone innocent. He always falls for that shit." The sentence was a blade honed with history, and as it echoed through the room's cold acoustics, Camille's hand moved, subtle, too late, to mute a reaction that had already passed her pupils. She laughed weakly. "You really think that's me on trial because some boy said something shady?" But Rachel wasn't smiling. "It's not what he said. It's what you didn't deny. He references you, your plan, your language. And if needed, we have a second file with the full transcript of the phone call, made from your personal line at 11:43 p.m., logged by your own carrier. Shall I play it?" Camille's silence wasn't a no. It was a scream in formal wear. Rachel didn't press play again. She didn't need to. The room had shifted. Camille's body leaned slightly forward, not with interest, but with calculation, eyes darting for exits that weren't physical. Her voice came out smooth but flattened. "This is cute. It's a performance. You're trying to corner me into some emotional confession. That won't work." Elijah finally moved, just his hand, sliding a white envelope across the table. Inside was not a letter, but a single image. Camille's handwriting, a draft of a contract modification with altered clauses embedded within legitimate paperwork. Elijah's voice, dry, almost bored. "You left this in the storage unit behind the photo albums. You really should have shredded it." Camille's hands didn't shake, but her lips did. She picked up the envelope with the grace of someone unbothered, but held it like it was melting through her skin. Rachel leaned in, voice low and deliberate. "Plan B wasn't just about getting free, it was about burying him in your escape. You drafted 3 false documents, planted pre-signed authorizations to link Elijah to financial fraud, and then started building your own alibi and therapy sessions you recorded without his consent. You didn't just plan to leave, you planned to erase him." Camille closed her eyes for a full second too long, and when she opened them, something had changed. Not fear, not anger, but the vacant recognition of someone watching the floor collapse and realizing they're already falling. "You think anyone outside this room will care?" she asked. "Public opinion bends easily. I'll spin this. I always do." Rachel didn't flinch. "We know," she said. "That's why we already sent a copy to the Illinois State Bar Association and a sealed version to the press under protective source." Camille blinked. Then, for the first time, truly froze. Her throat moved like it wanted to swallow something too large. Elijah didn't smile, didn't flinch. He simply said, "This time, you won't get to narrate the ending." Before Camille could respond, the glass door behind her clicked open. Not loudly, but with the kind of decisiveness that made breath pause mid-throat. A pair of heels entered, slower than hers, less pointed, but heavier somehow, and Camille turned with the reflex of someone who still believed she controlled the cast list. But she hadn't expected Greta, the assistant she fired last spring for misalignment of vision, now standing by Rachel's side, holding her own folder, dressed not for war, but for truth. "What is she doing here?" Camille's voice cracked. It wasn't fear. It was disbelief, as if reality had failed to follow her script. Rachel didn't answer. Greta did. "You asked me to fake a statement, to say I witnessed Elijah threaten you. You offered me 10 grand and a referral to work under your cousin's firm." Camille's laugh burst out, too loudly, too fast. "She's delusional. She's obsessed with me." But Greta didn't flinch. "I was. You made me feel seen, like someone worth listening to. But I started recording you the day you told me to forge that police draft." Her words were soft. Her phone, however, was louder. Greta pulled it from her pocket, placed it gently on the table, and clicked play. Camille's voice came through clear as gospel. "He'll believe it. He always does. Just shake a little, cry twice, say he grabbed your arm. No one questions a woman if she sounds broken enough." The sound that followed wasn't silence. It was something colder. The estate advisor, who hadn't spoken in over 30 minutes, cleared his throat. This alters the scope of the meeting." Camille stood, again, for the 3rd time in under an hour. "This is entrapment. It's revenge porn. It's—" But she didn't finish because Elijah opened one final file. Inside were scanned images, handwritten journal entries in Camille's own script, ones she thought were private. One page read, "If he ever wakes up, I'll blame depression. If he doesn't, I'll take the house and the sympathy." Camille reached for the folder like it burned her. but Rachel pulled it back. These were found inside the backup folders of your cloud account, synced via your iPad, which remained connected to the home Wi-Fi for 11 months after separation. We didn't hack you. You left the door open. For the first time, Camille stopped speaking. Her hands hovered over the table like wings, unsure how to land. Her mouth twitched, half prepared for a monologue that no longer had an audience. Greta looked at her not with vengeance, but with mourning. You taught me how to control a room. I just never thought I'd have to use it against you. Elijah's eyes didn't waver. He said nothing, but his stillness again became a verdict. Camille sat down, this time not in defiance, not in calculation, but in surrender. Not because she gave up, because there was nothing left to protect. She reached for her glass of water and missed. The glass toppled, water streaking the table like spilled dignity, and the only sound in the room was its slow trickle onto the marble floor. The room no longer felt like a place for resolution. It felt like a mausoleum, not of bodies, but of illusions. Camille sat in silence, a ghost still warm, her eyes scanning documents she once authored like spells that had lost their magic. Greta returned to her seat in the corner, no longer a witness but a quiet gravestone of trust betrayed. Rachel closed the final folder not with finality but with reverence, as if the truth, now laid bare, deserved a moment of silence. Camille looked up at Elijah for the first time, not as a strategist, not as an opponent, but as something she had never acknowledged he could be, an equal. But he wasn't interested in the stare. He was looking past her, at the door, at the life waiting beyond this room where she no longer existed. She opened her mouth. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, voice shaking but controlled, her last vestige of power trying to dress itself in remorse. It started as defense. You changed, Elijah. You stopped seeing me. Her tone was softer now, a relic from the days when manipulation wore the mask of vulnerability. Elijah stood, not abruptly, not to shock. He simply stood like a man whose sentence had been served, though he was never the one accused. His voice, low and steel-cut, filled the room's final breath. You're right. I stopped seeing you, because you weren't there. Just a reflection built from the angles I wanted to believe. You wore my empathy like a costume and called it love. Camille flinched, not at the volume, which was barely above a whisper, but at the precision. This isn't revenge, he added, pulling one final envelope from his coat. This is record-keeping. He placed it before her. Inside, the USB drive. All the files. Every word. Every frame. Not as a threat, but as a ledger. Camille didn't touch it. Her hands rested now like ornaments, unmoving, unsure of their purpose. Elijah turned toward the advisor. No further action needed. This conversation was the resolution. Then, finally, he looked at Camille, not with hate, not even with pity, just a quiet, irreversible goodbye. The thing about karma, he said, walking toward the door, is it doesn't have to raise its voice. It just has to show up. As the door clicked behind him, Camille remained seated, surrounded by windows that now reflected nothing. Her own reflection stared back at her, but it no longer smiled. It no longer spoke. It just waited for consequence. And outside, the sun had reached its peak. Bright, indifferent, final. Camille didn't fall in a courtroom, not with a judge's gavel or the gasp of a gallery. She fell in pixels, in timestamps, in the quiet burn of a truth too methodically revealed to deny. It began not with headlines, but with the absence of them. An eerie pause from the outlets that used to celebrate her morning quotes, her curated wisdom on betrayal, empowerment, energy, realignment. And in that pause, the world tilted. The first article didn't name her. It titled her, "The Illusionist of Intimacy," and under it, a simple subtitle, "When Empathy Becomes a Weapon." Camille read it alone, sitting in the kitchen she once claimed was her sanctuary, now dimly lit, unfamiliar, a stage dismantled after a final act that no one applauded. She reached for her phone, thumb hovered over Rachel's name, but stopped, because instinct knows when power has shifted. By midday, the internet had turned clinical. Comments weren't angry, they were surgical, and worse, they were archived. No trending tag, just a persistent murmur. Was she ever real? A former client posted a screenshot of a message Camille once sent, coaching her on how to navigate grief, time-stamped weeks before she crafted fraudulent invoices in the same name. Another posted a photo, an embrace from a retreat, now annotated with a caption. She said healing comes with honesty. She forgot to apply it to herself. But the real rupture came not from betrayal. It came from exposure. The kind that doesn't scream. It documents. And as each thread unraveled, Camille's inbox grew colder, until even her agent, once her loudest advocate, forwarded a list of canceled speaking engagements with a subject line that read simply, "We'll circle back eventually. Maybe." The apartment felt larger now, not in space, but in emptiness. Every chair unoccupied became a question she couldn't answer. Every mirror stopped reflecting a brand and began revealing a woman no longer in control of her image. She lit a candle, sandalwood, her signature scent. But the smoke didn't soothe. It crawled up her throat like judgment. On her laptop, she opened her website. Camille Dyer, Empathy, Power, Truth. The loading bar hesitated. Then nothing. A blank white screen. The server had suspended the domain. She refreshed. Still blank. A sob built behind her teeth. But it never came out. Because even sorrow in moments like this felt performative. And Camille no longer had an audience. He didn't run. He didn't shatter. Elijah walked out of the restaurant like a man who had returned from a war only he could see, and as he stepped into the chilled Chicago night, the wind didn't bite. It baptized. The city didn't know what had just happened behind those glass walls, didn't hear the silence Camille drowned in, didn't see the last flicker of her certainty extinguished beneath the soft click of a USB sliding across linen. But Elijah knew. And that knowing, that singular quiet confirmation, was all he needed. He didn't sleep that night. He watched the lights shift against the window blinds of a hotel room that smelled like neutrality, the kind of place where nothing had ever been hurt or healed. The sheets were tucked too tight, the minibar unopened. But for the first time in years, Elijah didn't have to negotiate with his reflection. He just looked, and it looked back, without flinching. Morning found him already dressed, not in armor, not in style, but in softness. He walked to a corner cafe, ordered coffee black, no sugar, no metaphor, and sat at the window as people passed, unaware that the man behind the glass had once been dismantled and had now begun, in small, unremarkable ways, to build something again. Not revenge, not triumph, just breath. He didn't check his phone. The messages had stopped. Rachel had sent one final text. "She'll be processed by the truth now. You don't need to do anything." Elijah responded with a single word. Understood. He deleted the thread, not in anger, in ceremony. Days turned without collapse. He returned to his old apartment, a modest third-floor space with squeaky steps and windows that let in more wind than light. He kept it untouched for years, a relic of a former self. But now, it felt not like regression, but reclaiming. He dusted off an old record player, found the jazz vinyl he used to fall asleep to. Mingus, Armstrong, no lyrics, just sound, just flow. He didn't reach out to friends. He didn't explain. Healing, for Elijah, wasn't public. It was private. It was pouring detergent without remembering to buy it. It was walking past a mirror and not flinching when he saw his own stillness. It was sitting at his desk, opening a fresh document, and typing a name that was only his. No joint accounts. No signatures rehearsed for legal defense, just Elijah. First name, full man. The world didn't end. It just adjusted. And in that quiet adjustment, Elijah found peace not in justice served, but in no longer being the one who needed to serve it. The silence between him and Camille remained unbroken. No apology, no retaliation, just a void where conflict used to echo. And somehow, that void was enough. In the weeks that followed, stories about Camille faded, not erased, but absorbed into the collective memory like old scandals that become warning signs for the next generation. Her name still appeared, but now, in whispered context. Don't be a Camille. Her fall was not explosive. It was educational. Her greatest punishment was not losing her audience. It was watching herself become a lesson. Elijah never returned to the same routines. He didn't date. He didn't redecorate. He simply lived, unbranded, unrehearsed. He'd pass people on the street, strangers who might have read about him but didn't recognize his face, and that anonymity felt like sanctuary. One evening, he attended a gallery opening alone, not to be seen, but to see. A painting caught his eye, bold reds fractured by a single white stroke, chaotic, but honest. The artist had named it Alignment. He stared at it for 10 minutes, then left without speaking to anyone. On the walk home, he passed a bookstore, saw a girl sitting by the window, reading in a way Camille never did, not for performance, but for solitude. And Elijah smiled, not because he was healed, not because he was ready, but because for the first time, he didn't flinch at the idea of beginnings. Camille would rebuild. She had to. People like her always do, but not with the same materials, not in the same shape, and never again under the illusion that she could outrun what she became. Because karma, as it turns out, doesn't knock. It doesn't demand entry. It waits in the background, in the footnotes, in the way receipts line up, or emails fail to delete, or voices remember what was said when no one thought they were listening. Karma doesn't hunt you down. It lets you bury yourself. Slowly, elegantly, precisely. And that's how karma struck, proving no one escapes justice. Call to action, the echo after the storm. If this story made you pause, breathe deeper, or remember someone you've tried to forget, hit like and subscribe to support the channel. Share this video to remind others that justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it just takes one person standing and another with nowhere left to hide. Drop a comment below if you've ever met a Camille or had to become your own Elijah. And remember, the seeds you sow today will bloom tomorrow, whether you like it or not.